Thanks for the invitation and for giving me this unexpected opportunity to present. So the bad news is that it was unexpected, so it's not really ready, but we will do our best. This is a joint work with Nathan Gallo, with here, and Moritz Engel, with also here, and Emric, who is not here, but whose paper we present during all the afternoon. So we had a very nice introduction, in fact, by Katya about the topic of what we also do here, which is about the fight against fake news, and in particular, the efficiency of fact-checking. I guess we all know that there is this increasing issue of like misinformation and fake news. This was the case, for example, in recent election. It was the case in the US. It was the case in France, where you had, like, in 2022, a lot of like fake news spread on social media. This is just one example. This is about a fake survey pretending that Emmanuel Macron would be eliminated in the first round. It was posts on Twitter. It was posted on Facebook, like from a newspaper from Switzerland. And then after it was posted, they were fact-checked. That was done by the AFP, Agence France Presse. I'm going to come back to that. This is the third largest news agency in the world. So basically, it was first posted on Twitter on March 31, around the same time on Facebook. Then, like 6 days later, on April 6, AFP decided, okay, we should like look at after this survey, because this is like getting a lot of publicity on Facebook. And then they wrote a fact check on April 6, saying that at the end of the day, it was going to be false. And if you look at the shares of the post linked to this fake news on Facebook, you see a drop, because actually at that time you have some like posts linked to this fake news that were like just like erased by the users. You see a post following the fact check. That's nice. But that is what in economics we are going to call a simple difference. And basically we can say, oh, that's nice, you have a fact check and it reduces circulation, or you can have many things happening at the same time. And one of the big issue we have, like I would say, like all of us trying to work on this, on the efficiency of fact checking, is basically to have what we will call a counterfactual. You have a lot of newspapers and media outlets now doing fact-checking. This is becoming like a real business. Okay, you have like hundreds of news organizations. And basically, we do that because we believe it will work. Okay, we always believe you have a fake news. Okay, if you say people this is false, people should share it less. But as we just saw, this is not so obvious. And so basically, what would be nice is to be able to quantify the causal effect of a fact check. The second thing is that at the end of the day, there is not a lot we know about the way fact checkers work. Okay, we don't know a lot about how they find fake news and which kind of fake news they choose whether or not to debunk. Which is not obvious because, you know, you go on Twitter for 5 minutes and you will find fake news everywhere. And at the end of the day, we have like limited resources. So how do they do their job in a sense? And we don't know also a lot about the way they pick their rating. We know like whether they're going to say this is true or false, but if you go on Facebook and look at the different ratings, you will have some true, false, partly false, missing context. And so what are these different kind of flags and what are the kind of implications they might have? And so the last challenging question is whether it works, and in particular, like to quantify the causal effect of fact check. This is not obvious. This has been done in the literature, and Katya and Sergey have a lot of work on that by using mainly survey experiment, which is very, very nice in terms of like clear identification and also in terms of the different kind of mechanisms you can do, you can test. In fact, much more than what we are going to be able to evaluate here. One of the limits of this survey experiment approach is in terms of external validity. So what we decided to do here is the following. Basically, what we wanted to have in an ideal world is like all the stories that could have been fact-checked, and some of them are fact-checked, and some of them are not for exogenous reason. Okay, you would like in an ideal world to have like some treated group, so fake stories that are fact-checked, and some control groups, fake stories that are not fact-checked for exogenous reason. And so what we did to try to like mimic this ideal work is that we had a partnership with Agence France Presse. So this is a French news agency. This is also the third largest news agency in the world. And this is the largest fact-checking team in the world. And what we do is that basically we hire researcher slash journalist, so Nathan slash co-author, for like 1 year and a half, who worked at Agence France Presse, in fact, as part of the fact-checking team. He sit like every morning during the editorial meetings. He actually also write like some fact checks, so do the job of fact checkers. And basically the idea is like by sitting every morning during the meeting, you can list all the stories that are considered for fact-checked. You can identify those that are going to be actually fact-checked. And you can also list all of those that were considered but not fact-checked at the end of the day and the reasons why. And in particular, the kind of reasons why that would be of interest for us to define our control group would be the fact that you don't have enough time to fact-check all the stories. So this is the way, in a sense, we will build this treated group of like fact-check stories and this control group of similar stories that could have or should have been fact-checked, but that were not at the end of the day because of a lack of time. So this is the first thing that we will do. So we do that thanks to Nathan sitting since December 2021. In fact, we have like 9 more days or 8 more days, like it will be like until June 13 of this year, and collect this information on all the new stories considered by journalists. So we have information on the stories considered, on whether or not you decide to fact check the stories, and of the reason why you do not fact check the stories at the end of the day. And this will be your first source of variation to build a nice control group to identify the cause effect of fact checks. Then we go one step further, and this is something we got, in fact, from like working directly with fact checkers. You have different steps. So you have a fake news, you write a fact check, okay? And then for each of the stories that are faked, you have a different number of posts on Facebook, okay? And you can have like 10 posts, you can have 50 posts, you can have like 100 posts. Once a fact checker publishes the fact check, the second step of his job is to go on Facebook and basically rate the post. Pick a post and say, okay, this is a fake news. But you can have 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20. And the fact checkers do not have an infinite amount of time, in particular, given they are paid for the fact check that they do and not depending on the number of posts that they rate. So their only monetary incentive, in a sense, is just to fact check a story, okay? Not to rate the post. And so the second source of variation that we are going to use here will be like within fact check stories. We are going to look at the posts that are rated by the fact checkers and compare them with the posts that are associated to the fake news, but that are not rated at the end of the day by the fact checkers. Okay, so this is a second source of heterogeneity. This like flagged versus unflagged posts that we're going to use here for identification. Okay. In terms of like preview of the results, so basically the first thing that I'm going to show you that fact checking kind of work, it reduces the circulation on average of the shares of the post on Facebook linked to fake news by around 19%, which is like both a statistically and economically significant effect. You will also see that the way you fact check matters. And in particular, one of the things that is important is the speed of the fact checked. So both how long it takes to write the fact checked and how long it takes to find the fake news. And this will have important policy implications. Again, like in a world with limited resources, it might mean that at the end of the day, it would be better to do simpler fact checks because you can do them very quickly than to do like very hard fact check that might be like of more interest, let's say, for a journalist, but that are kind of less useful in reducing the spread of the fake news. And then, and this is kind of linked to what Katya also just presented, we are going to look at the difference in magnitude depending on the type of flags. So the kind of message you give to people might have an impact on their probability to share or not a fake news. Okay. So just compared to the existing literature, so we already had like a literature review on this fact-checking efficiency. So basically, I would say that the main contribution of what we do is really to have this partnership with AFP that allows us first to add external validity in a sense to the existing literature. And second, this might sound descriptive, but I think it's very important even for us, like as economists, to try to understand understand how to evaluate the way fact-checking work, we are going to have like detailed information, let's say like insider information on the way fact-checking team actually find fake news and decide to produce fact checks. Okay. So let me turn to the data. So quick word about AFP. This is the largest fact-checking organization in the world. AFP Factuel is the name of their fact-checking team. This was created in 2017. As of today, they have 140 journalists doing fact-checks around the world, of which around 13 are in France. In an year like 2021, they published a little bit more than 8,600 fact checks, out of which like a little bit less than 800 are in French. Okay. Since 2017, you have this partnership between AFP Factuel and Facebook. So this is part of the third-party fact-checking program. So basically, you have a number of accredited organizations around the world that work for Facebook to produce fact-checking, that are paid, in fact, to actually produce and publish this fact-check. So these are kind of like information that we do not have in terms of how much they are paid by fact check, which is kind of bad because we would like to have this economic information, but at least what we know is that they're paid at a fixed rate by fact check and not depending on the number of posts they rate, which will be of importance for our second identification strategy. And so we have this partnership with AFP Factuel since December 2021, so that will have 1.5 years. Overall, we have 831 stories that were considered for a fact-checked during that time period. As you will see, for some of the variables that we use, for example, the origin of the story, so whether it comes from Facebook, from Twitter, from TikTok, we have a little bit less observation, just because, like, you know, like we learned, in fact, what was the process at play, like during our time period with Nathan working at AFP. And so like 1 month after the other, basically we improve on the kind of information we were willing to collect. So Nathan worked as an integral part of the AFP Factuel team. He attends all the morning meetings. He records all the stories that are considered, and then basically we'll code and have a weekly discussion with the editor-in-chief to identify the reasons why a story might not have been fact-checked. There is 5 main reasons. The first one is it is not feasible. Okay, for some of the stories, you might know that this is a fake news, but it's very hard to prove. So then they decide not to fact check. It might be partly true, okay, and they decide in this case not to fact check. I don't know how much time you spend on Facebook, but this is a Facebook policy not to put on a story this is true. Okay, you just have the information when this is false. So when something is partly true, basically they decide not to do it. This might be due to a lack of resources, lack of time, or just a lack of fact checkers. You also have like some volatility, you know, across time on how many fact checks are produced. Like I can guess that being in France, like in August, for example, the number of fake news fact checks produced is going to be much lower. They might decide not to do it because it has already been checked by others. And very often, in this case, they don't do it again. Okay, you already have a fact check by Le Monde or by the New York Times or whatever. There is no need, in a sense, for AFP to do it again. And the last one, that in a sense is not good for us. So we collected it, but we are going to exclude it from our control group, is because of a lack of virality. Okay, you can have a fake news. This is a fake news, but nobody cares about it. Nobody talk about it. So you are not going to fact check it. Okay. The way it works basically is the following: like each morning, you have all the journalists from the team that show up in the newsroom, and they have to propose some fact check stories. So basically, in a sense, when they go to work, they are trying to like pick stories that are going to be fact checked. Okay, this is part of their job. Where do they find these stories? So different sources, and that varies according to the journalist. This is something that I'm not going to spend a lot of time today on, but basically we also collect the journalist unique identifier, and they don't behave the same way. Some like younger journalists, for example, they have more information from TikTok, and like older journalists from Facebook. So basically the main source of information, but that's true. I swear. So like you have like around like more than 1/3 of the story that come from Twitter. Then you have 27% that come from Facebook account. Officially, you know, you have this Facebook claim or Facebook queue. So this is a queue that is done by Facebook that is supposed to use an algorithm to identify automatically all the fake news. It turns out that when you talk to the journalists, very few of them use it because it's kind of very bad. We're also back to this issue of like policy implications, because perhaps Facebook does not have a lot of monetary incentives to officially identify good fake news, because it means like a drop in circulation and so less click and less advertising revenues. Since like a couple of months, there is WhatsApp. So basically, AFP set up a WhatsApp number where you can write to them and signal some fake news. And then you have like other social media with an increasing but still very small role played by TikTok. Okay. So what I was telling you before, when they come to work and suggest stories, they think that the stories is suitable for a fact check, but it might not be fact checked. And so we collected this information on the reasons for not fact checking a story. At the end of the day, in our sample, now we have 833 stories, and you have among them 348 unchecked stories. So you have a little bit less than 2/3 of the stories that are going to be fact-checked and 1/3 that is not going to be fact-checked. The main reason in the data for not fact-checking a story is because it's infeasible. This is followed by probably true. You have 17% of the stories that are not fact-checked because of a lack of resources, 17% because of a lack of virality, and 9% because they have already been fact-checked by other media outlets. Okay. Knowing here that these are not like official categories. Huh? These are categories we determined ourselves during our conversation with AFP journalists. Some people might say that lack of resources and infeasible should be included in the same category. So they are not able to do it either because it's too complicated or because they don't have enough like journalists or time to do so. Okay. Once they produced a fact check, they have to flag the post on Facebook that are associated with the fact check. And so here there are like 4 different kind of flags they can use. Either they use false or altered content flag, and then the content is blurred. I'm going to show you an example. Or they use partly false or missing context. So false, it's kind of easy. It's fake news. Altered content very often is linked to the fact that we use a video or an image in a bad context. So this is not that the image is not true, like it's a true image, but it's used in a false context. So this creates kind of a fake news. Partly false or missing context are for stuff that are considered a little bit more complicated by the AFP to be just rated as false. So basically, this is when you have either false content or altered content. You know, you have a fake news. You see that on Facebook, and it's completely blurred. Okay, so what is written here is that it's written like false information checked by independent fact checkers. You never have the name of the fact checker, but if you click on the link, you will find the fact check. So basically here you will be sent to the website of the AFP. You can do 2 things. Either you do nothing. You will see that a lot of people stop sharing that. You can click on see why, and then you will see the fact check and you will follow the fact check. Or you can say, okay, let's look at it anyway. And then what you do is that you deblur, or we invented this word, I don't know whether like new vocabulary, deblurring a story, but the computer don't want me to show fake news. So yeah. Okay, but we have a nice link to this deblurred story, and you can also decide whether or not you want to share it, even if you don't deblur it before. Okay. These are for the fake news or false content, altered content. You can put 2 other type of flags that are, let's say, lighter flags that are for partly false or missing context. In this case, what happens is that you have kind of a signal. Okay, so this is written like partly false information, but you still see the post. Okay, so the signal sent by the AFP, in a sense, is like much less stronger because you see the information and you can decide first to look or not at the fact check, and then to decide whether or not you want to share it, like it, comment on it. Okay. In terms of the number of flags associated to our fact check stories, basically you will have 67% false, 17% missing context, 11% partly false, a little bit of altered content. Basically, satire in France would be the Gorafi. I don't know what is a good example in like in Anglo-Saxon context, but these are like fake news that are done on purpose by a satire website. Okay. So basically, you have a yes. So the question is whether the fact checkers have to manually flag the post, and this is exactly what happens. So you go on Meta, so they have access to a Meta interface just for the fact checkers. When they will see all the posts that are associated to the fake news, and like one after one, they have to check the box. And basically, like the example I like to give is like they will like it will be the end of the day, or they have to move to another fact check, or they just are hungry and want to have some lunch. At some point, they would stop. And so this is nice for us. I won't say that it might be nice to fight against fake news, but this is nice for us because we have this second source of identification here. Yeah.
There is a question by John Rust, who is saying that I'm confused by the effect of being fact-checked. Will there be different effects about a post that is fact-checked and judged to be true versus one that is fact-checked and judged to be false? So the positive effects for fact-check found to be true, negative on viewership traffic to post fact-check and found to be false.
Yeah, so this is a good question. So basically, there is no fact-check found to be true. And this is like a policy of all the fact checkers. They could have done so, and this is kind of like strange in a sense to put like more weight on like false news than on real news, but this is a policy that they have. So basically there will be like no fact check if something is found to be true. It's very rare though, perhaps we will have like 1 or 2 examples in 1 year and a half, then the journalists come in the newsroom with a story that at the end of the day will be shown to be true. In general, they try to fact check stories that have a very high probability to be fake news. Okay. And so the second source of identification is really using the fact that AFP is paid per fact checked, not per flag. So within a story, they are only going to flag some posts. And this is the second thing that we are going to use as a source of identification, the fact that on average, for each story, you have 45% of the associated posts that are flagged. Okay. And this is same source of variation. So this one, you saw it before. And this is the same fake news, exactly the same, but on a different Facebook post associated to the fake news. This one was flagged, this one was not flagged. And so we can like study the propagation of these 2 posts following the publication of the fake news. So in terms of like collecting data, so for each story we have information on the origin of the story, so WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, on the topic of the story. Even if like now I'm not showing you any descriptive statistics just because I'm not going to use that in today's presentation, but we'll have like elections, like politics. Ukraine is a huge topic during this time period, economy, etc. And we know whether or not the story has been fact-checked. Okay, if it has not been fact-checked, we have the reason for why it has not been fact-checked. So that is going to allow us to define our control group. And if it has been fact-checked, we have information on the kind of flag that has been used, for example, false or missing content, and we keep track of all the contributions to the morning discussion, and we have this unique journalist identifier. On top of that, so our outcome of interest, I am talking to you about like fact check, is to know whether or not you have a slowdown in the propagation of the stories on Facebook. So we need to collect data on the popularity of the different kind of stories on Facebook. So what we do is that we collect data on all the posts associated to these stories. And basically for all these posts using CrowdTangle, we're going to use data on the engagement with the post. So the number of shares, the number of likes, the number of comments, okay? And we have that for this 18 months of data. On average, when you see this table, I think you will understand why. After that, I'm going to use logarithm on the left-hand side. On average, you see that, for example, there is 32 posts associated with each stories. But if you look at both the median and the standard deviation, you see that you have a lot of variability. So you can have like very, very popular fake news, and some of them are much less popular, but still giving rise to a fact check by AFP. Okay. So in terms of identification, so we have these two different empirical strategies. The first one is really the story level identification strategy, where we compare the stories that gave rise to a fact check to similar, between quotes, stories that could have been fact checked, but that were not at the end of the day, in particular because of a lack of resources. And then we will assume that absent the treatment, the fact check stories would have followed the same thread as unchecked stories after consideration. And I'm going to show you some plots with free trends. And then we do a within story analysis by comparing posts and looking for each fact check stories at the circulation of the post that have been flagged and those that have not been flagged. Okay. So more precisely, here is the identification strategy that we follow. So basically for each of the story, at each point of time, we are going to compute information on all the shares of the post related to the story. And then basically we are going to look at how this number of shares is affected by the fact of being fact-checked. And so this is the indicator variable fact interacted with the time the time indicator being defined with respect to the time of consideration. So we don't work with respect to the time of the fact checks. In fact, we cannot if we want to define the control group, because the control group is never fact checked. So basically our comparison point will be with the point at which in the agencies they discuss the story. We control for story and time fixed effect, as well as for day of the week. And in our control group, we are going to include all the considered but unchecked stories, except those that were unchecked because of a lack of virality. Okay. So the first thing that we have in terms of parallel trends, so if you just look at the raw data, the mean number of shares associated both with fact-checked and not fact-checked stories before and after that have been discussed by the AFP, the first thing that you see that you have kind of a difference in level, not in the direction we were expected. In fact, we were expecting the fact-check stories to be more shared than the non-fact-checked. So this is the reverse. But basically, they were following like parallel trends. And what is happening is that following the fact-check, you have kind of a slowdown in the growth of the number of shares associated to fact-check stories compared to unchecked stories. So you see that better if you do the proper event study estimates. So we work like a 6 hours interval by 6 hours interval. Okay, again, we use as a reference point the first time where the story is discussed by the AFP. And what you see here is that after 96 hours compared to unchecked stories, fact-checking leads to a decrease by around 26% in the number of posts. Okay, if rather than looking at, so the nice things about these event studies, you really see that nothing is happening before the time of discussion. If you look at the difference in difference table, you can estimate what is happening overall, and you find that fact-checking reduces the overall number of shares of posts associated to the stories by 19%. Okay. So this is the first result that we have. The second question we were wondering is whether this vary with the characteristics of the fact-checked. And the third dimension we consider here is the fact-checking speeds. So for each of the story, we have the time when it is discussed by the journalist, and we know when the fact check is published. Okay. On average, basically, you have 25% of the stories that are fact checked within a day, but you have a lot of heterogeneity. And for some of the stories, it can take much longer. And so we wanted to know whether this like time interval between the time of consideration and the time of publication of the fact check matters. And it turns out that it actually matters. You see a much larger drop of the effects for the stories that are fact checked within 2 days than for the other stories. For the other stories, in fact, if you take the difference in different tables, it's still significant, but it's like hardly significant, and it's much lower in magnitude. But if you do that quickly, you have this effect. Yeah, Kadir.
comment on what is the life cycle of the story. So how long it's been shared in the absence of fact checking to understand this effect better. Thank you.
So that's a very good point. So at the end of the day, so I have the plots somewhere that are hidden. What we decided to do is, so we have kind of a trade-off here, like whether we consider like the story like forever, and never if it lasts like 1, 2, 5, 6 days, 10 days after a fact check, or whether we just look at kind of a limited time window to have a sample that is more or less balanced. So here what we did, and that's like not a good answer, but that's what I have under my eyes now, that we focus on like 1 or 2 days before and 3 or 4 days after. When you look at the propagation, you see like on average that this fact check story, they continue growing, you know, like over time. You see that here. In fact, like the answer to your question would be the average between these two things, but still you see that it's kind of like slow down over time. What we didn't do, but in a sense that would be kind of nice to do, is to compute kind of a survival rate and look at after how many days basically you no longer have new shares associated to a story. That we have that in the data. This is just that we didn't think about that, and we should look at that. That's a very good point. Yeah, thanks. So we'll do that. The second dimension of heterogeneity we look at. So like in terms of like policy implication, the kind of things that I will discuss after that, it means that at the end of the day, if you want to be efficient in reducing the spread of fake news, it's better to focus on like easy to do fact checks than on very, very long fact checks. And in fact, when you talk with people at the AFP on the reasons why from time to time they tell the journalists you won't do this one, because it will take too long. Like the editor-in-chief has this kind of knowledge that younger journalists might not know. And the second dimension that we look at is basically, I'm talking about like time upon consideration. But one of the things that is also of interest is when the fake news was published to begin with. Okay, so how long, in fact, it took the journalist either to discover the fake news or to realize that this might be important and we should fact check these stories. And again, here, if you look at heterogeneity between stories that are considered less or more than 4 days after their publication, you see that the effect is much stronger in terms of magnitude if you look at stories that are fact-checked 4 days, for less than 4 days after their publication. So this is another like policy implication in a sense. If you want to maximize the use of the agency resources, it might not be worth it at the end of the day, fact-checking a story that has been around for a very long time period. Okay. In terms of robustness with respect to this strategy, and this first one is important, if we just focus for the control groups or those stories that are not fact-checked because are just infeasible or not enough resources who have the same thing, I'm showing you the results to be consistent always with the number of shares. If you look at likes and comment, you find the same kind of stuff. One of the things that you also find is that this is not only about the average number of shares of the post associated to the story. This is also about the number of active posts associated to the story. So the posts that exist are less fact-checked, and you have like less new posts related to the stories, and some existed posts related to the stories that are actually erased after the publication of the fake news. So basically, when people receive information about, this was actually a fake news, some of them just decide to delete their post. So you have like two dimensions in a sense. You have kind of an intensive and an extensive margin here. The second thing we look at is this within story post-level approach. So basically here we focus on the sample of stories that have been fact-checked by the AFP. And for these stories, we are going to compare the posts that have been flagged to the posts that have not been flagged by the AFP. What is here the good way to define time and to compare like 3 posts? We decided to use the time of the first flag for each of the story, because the time of the first flag is in fact the time when the fact check is published to begin with. And what is nice here in terms of identification is in fact we can like even control for story specific time trends to like just capture this aspect and only focus on the effect of the flag associated to the post per se. Okay, these are the trends for the number of shares of the rated and non-rated post before, but again, you see the effect much better if you focus not on the mean, but on the event study indicator, and you see this collapse in the number of shares for the rated compared to the non-rated post after the publication of the first rating. One of the things that is kind of important and that we are like more than open to discuss because we are still trying to understand it and we are not like fully able to do so before today is in terms of the magnitude of the results. So before I told you like 19%, it was around 19-20%. Now we have like one more zero basically, and this is like around like a 4 to 5% drop. So this is not the same empirical strategy, but still we are identifying, you know, the causal effect of a fact checked on the number of shares associated to post. And so we are trying to understand why you have these differences. So the different assumptions that we have are the following, and I am kind of looking forward, like any idea you could have. The first one is really that you have a difference in variability. So this explains part of the difference in the estimated coefficient. Basically, you have much more variability. The standard deviation is higher when you look at the number of shares at the level of the stories than at the level of the post. The second thing is that basically this is not the same sample, because here we are like just focusing on stories with post level variation in rating. So basically some of the stories with not a lot of posts, so where all the posts were fact checked, were rated by the fact checkers, are not introduced, are not included here. But I think what is the most interesting for us, and what we are still like trying to find a good way to really test, is the fact that within stories, we think that there might be some spillover effect. So basically, you have a fake news that is published, and then people will know that Macron will be qualified for the second round. And even if they do not receive a flag on their post, given that they know that this is a fake news because other posts have been flagged, they are going to behave as if they were aware. So this, we would like to really quantify it, like this spillover effect, and see what share of the difference between this rated and non, this post versus story level magnitude of the coefficient is explained by that. But basically, this is what we are like trying to work on. Yeah, so basically the question is to say that here we just focus on what is happening on Facebook, but for a given fake news, you will have it circulating on a lot of different media outlets, social media, and whether we can like look at what is happening on other social media outlets. What we are working on, but I guess it will be part of another project, or perhaps this one will become bigger, is to work on Twitter for fake news associated to politicians. So I didn't tell you a lot about that because this is not part of the sample. This is part of the Facebook policy. But basically, when you have politicians going on radio and TV and telling a fake news, it won't be fact check. This is one of the policy. It won't get it will be fact checked by the fact checking agency, but it won't get a flag on Facebook. Okay. So basically, Zemmour going and saying like wrong numbers about migrants. They will be fact checked, they will publish the fact check, but Facebook will do nothing because they decided never to fact check politician. One of the things we are working on now is that for this kind of news, we are looking at the behavior of the politicians on Twitter and at the associated post linked to their fake news. And in particular, we are using the fact, and this is also where it is nice to have an insider, we're using the fact that we collected information from the AFP on whether or not the politicians were called by the AFP journalist. Because very often when you publish, so a guy is going to tell fake news, the journalist before publishing the fact check is going to call the politician and to talk to him about the fake news. And you want to see whether or not the fact of receiving a call is going to monitor your behavior with respect to the fake news. So this would be a different project. But of course, in a sense, what we are capturing here can be considered as a lower bound of the overall effect of the work done by the AFP and other fact-checking agency, because we see that there might be some spillover effect, and we are just like focusing on Facebook, which is one of the social media, but far from being the only one. And let me just, yeah, and the last things we looked at, we were wondering whether or not the flag design matter, and in particular, what is happening if you compare posts that are rated false compared to posts that are rating missing context. And as you can see here, or even better, if you look at the proper difference in difference table with interaction, is that at least on the number of shares, the flag design does not seem to matter. So either it's kind of blurred, or this is saying like, okay, you have some missing context, you should double check the fact check and think like before sharing. In both cases, the magnitude of the decrease is kind of similar. We're pushing a little bit further on that because for now, what we have in terms of preliminary evidence, but still working on it, is like for likes and comments, it's not really the same. And false seems to work better on likes than missing context. But at least for sharing the news, you have this like same negative effect on the spread when you have a false fact check. Okay. So yeah, so basically we have these results on the effect of fact-checking on the circulation of fake news with this estimation by 17 to 19% drop in the circulation of news. And this finding that I think is key is that if you do it quickly, it's more effective. And I think it's important because it means that we might want to put more energy on simple fact-check. We have this like smaller magnitude of the effect when we work at the post level, and I think this point towards a spillover effect, but we still need to do that more properly. And in terms of like policy implications, you have this issue of like what are the good flagging tools, of course. You have this issue of like the speed of the fact check. The last one, and this is more linked like to broader policy implication as part of the DSA discussion. The fact that the fact checkers, like first we see that it matters, the fact that they can find the fake news quickly. And they're supposed to be given a tool by Facebook that is called the Facebook queue, where to find the fake news quickly. And you look at the data and you look at the way they behave, this tool is very, very bad. So like one of the implications is that we should improve this tool. And if we want to think a little bit further, it also means we should think about the incentives of Facebook that might not be good enough today for them to be willing to provide quickly fake news to fact checkers, even if they do pay the fact checkers for fact checking the stories. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks very much, Julia. And thanks again for stepping in for Andre at the last moment. Now, we don't have a lot of time, but we have time for a couple of quick questions. So maybe what I'll do is I'll ask people to identify if they want to ask a question. We'll take all the questions at once, and you can answer them all at once.
Yes, thank you very much, Julia. And I would like to follow up again on this issue of incentives of platforms linking to the regulation. The regulation is different in the US and in Europe. In Europe, we have DSA. We'll probably see the algorithm, but in general, what do you think can be done about the quality of this algorithm? We know Facebook in principle should be able to design a very smart algorithm. And if it spends more money, if it's forced to spend more money on fact checking, that will have more data to train this algorithm, right? So in principle, your work suggests that there is plenty of things that regulators can do, especially with the DSA. Another question is, can companies like OpenAI, algorithms that are not directly related to platform business, do something about this if they are asked to design an algorithm that can identify false news to improve what Facebook is doing?
Thanks, Julia. Just, I guess in the mechanism and interpretation here, I think my understanding, you can tell me if this is right, my understanding is that these flags on Facebook are not only shown to the users, but also affect ranking and what's shown. And so I think it would just be good to clarify, is it correct that part or maybe a lot of this effect is working through that? I think through that lens, to some extent, what's striking here is how small these effects are, because I think the kind of anecdotal perception is that things that have clear false ratings get downranked a lot, and this is a remarkably small effect. I mean, it may be that they require multiple fact checkers to agree in order to do that. Anyway, I think that's, those smallish effects are really interesting. I also wonder, as you mentioned spillover effects as a reason for the difference in magnitudes, and another version of those spillover effects is just that downranking is going to affect even posts that are not flagged, but that are related. And so it could work through the users, but it could also work through the platform algorithm.
Let me just add one thing to Matt's. So Facebook says that false stories that are fact-checked, the virality is reduced, the sharing is reduced to 80%. So that's a big discrepancy here. And so I'd be really interested in the heterogeneity among the stories, whether you find that some stories have much, much lower virality as a result of these fact checks versus others, because it may be that some of these, you know, the partly true, partly false stuff is part of the story. Second thing I would say, and this goes to the Tucker et al. Paper that was cited in the previous one, and I'm the al on the et al. There. You know, one of the hardest things, of course, fact checks in the first 48 hours are the most effective, but it's also where it's most uncertain as to whether something is true or not. And so one of the difficulties is to design a system in which you will, one that's also politically neutral, by the way, which is you know, something that's really of concern here, to make sure that you actually can identify in those first 48 hours. We found that, at least when you do it with the crowd, we did it with both professional fact checkers and the crowd, that in those first 48 hours, there was a huge amount of divergence among the different fact checkers as to whether something was true or not.
Grace, if you can answer that reasonably quickly, that'd be great.
So great questions. In fact, you have two things. I'm going to begin with the second one and then finish with the policy implications. So you have two things that are supposed to be done by Facebook. The first one is to reduce virality, and the second one is to shadow ban users. And we don't know how it works. It means even here, like at Sciences Po, we have a very good Media Lab team with some researchers that are like having like a working paper on that in computer science that try, in fact, to mimic the shadow ban policy by Facebook, because Facebook does not make this information like public and transparent. In a sense, I would say that the first policy implication is that we should have information really on how much they reduce virality. They say, you know, part of the thing that we have and we don't put in the paper is that because you have like secret meetings between fact checkers and Facebook, when you don't even have the right to see the slide, when they say stuff and they never like give the information. So we know a little bit that they shadow ban, but we don't know really like how do they pick the account that they shadow ban and for how long, and same thing for the reduction of virality. Part of the effect is mechanical for sure, because they reduce the virality. It's not only that for two reasons. The first one is that we find heterogeneity depending on the speed of the fact check, and this like mechanical effect should affect all the stories the same way. And the second thing is that what they say, at least, is that they do reduce the visibility of the posts that are rated false, but not of the posts that are rated missing context. And we do find both an effect of the missing context and of the false post. The third thing that we have, and in a sense, I would say that this would be the most interesting part of the paper that you will see soon, is that what perhaps people will call historically the Streisand effect, but basically we have a lot of super spreaders. So we call them the super spreaders. So if we look at the behavior of the groups, you have like a small number of groups on Facebook that spread much more like fake stories than others. And one of the things that we document that in a very nice suggestive way, but we need to find a good way to quantify the effect in a causal way, is that these guys, after a story has been fact-checked, they tend to post new posts on the story. And basically, given the fact checker, you know, the fact checker is going to rate some post and then he will move to another story. They will post even more posts related to the story. So in fact, given that we look overall at the number of shares, you can have a reduction of the circulation of those shares that were first the shares of the posts that were first rated, but given that you have these super spreaders that spread like more posts associated to that, you have this other effect. So basically, it will be kind of a mix of the mechanical effect, behavioral effect of consumers that see the flag and decide to share less, and this like negative effect of super spreader that decide to react and fight against fact checkers by posting again all this fake news. On the policy implication, my view is, okay, so this should be like a broad policy implication, like for a McCourt working paper, you know, not for the paper we will submit. But I think a lot of what they do is PR, Okay, they do that because they want to show that they fight against fake news, and it's why they partner with all these media organizations. But basically, given the amount of money they spend on that, they could spend much more money on the algorithm. Okay, I never went to their algorithm, but you really talk to journalists, it's kind of a joke. And I think now we have enough like fake news, real news to train nice algorithms that will pick fake news in a much better way. What I do think is that either using AI or like using like European money, or by taxing platforms and using, like some tax money on their advertising revenues, we should like invest in some algorithms that will identify fake news, that will be put in a queue, that won't be called the Facebook claim, but let's say the fake news claim overall, that different fact-checking agencies can use. This is the first thing. The second thing that we are not discussing here, and this is not part of the paper, and we are very glad to work with the AFP, but at the end of the day, you have an issue of the the overall business model of the media industry, where you have like a number of media outlets that are more and more dependent of this partnership with the AFP, and that cannot really go and say, okay, we have an issue with the queue, because basically they are paid by Facebook to fact check news, even those that are not in the queue. So I think in terms of DSA, when we talk about algorithms, that's true that we say, okay, the platform should make their algorithm public, but perhaps one of the things that we should add is that we should spend more money collectively on having good algorithms that will help this fact-checking agency identify fake news and then publish fact check.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you.